I am Tiffany Flesher, and this is YouTube video number 2, Henry Holtz and the Gift of Slavery. When trying to define racism, I came across many definitions. The belief that all members of each race possesses characteristics or abilities specific to that race, especially as to distinguish it as inferior or superior to other races. Hate or intolerance of a race or races, and discrimination. Henry Holtz was a Confederate propagandist during the Civil War, and in my opinion, he was an extreme racist. In Literature of the Resistance, we were able to briefly explore his work, Review of the Distinction of the Races. Holtz believes in the superiority of the Aryan race. He believes that these distinctions of differences between Aryans and other races can be found in intelligence, moral character, and physique. As an example of his reasoning, Holtz poses the question, if the Negro is qualified by nature to be a rival of the white man, why does he remain a savage except for when he has been made a white man's slave? Holtz also believed that the Negro brain is small in capacity. He believes that black people are barbarians and uses the conditions of Africa as an example of this. Holtz goes on to justify slavery by saying that slaves are happy laborers and that their conditions have been made better. Holtz argues that the Negro's place in nature is insubordination to the white race. When reading this, I was appalled, and yet I realized that these were the beliefs of most of the Americans during these times. Through Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and Harriet Jacobs, we learned what it was like to be a person of color during these terrible times. All write of a life of servitude, degradation, subjugation, abuse, and atrocities against them, their loved ones, and almost all that they knew, beginning from their very earliest memories. All experienced their parents being ripped away from them during infancy and childhood. Sojourner and Douglass write of not knowing when they were even born. They were beaten, often starved, watch others be beaten. Both women had their children stolen from them and sold into slavery. They experienced rape, not only between themselves, but others as well. Holtz writes that slavery is a gift given to the Negroes. And yet, here we have an example of Negroes risking their life and limbs to be free of this so-called gift. Harriet Jacobs writes of witnessing a female cook being forced to eat food that she had prepared for the master's dog. The dog was dying and they were trying to force him to eat, so he salivated and frothed at the mouth into the bowl of food. After he passed, the slave master forced her to eat that very same food and then locked her away from her infant child, who she was breastfeeding at the time. She wrote of falling in love and yet not being allowed to be with him because she was someone's property and had no rights over her own mind, heart, or body. Douglass writes how he witnessed a slave being shot in the face and killed because he did not come when the master called. He wrote about how a female slave of 15 was killed, her body mutilated, because she fell asleep when she was supposed to be keeping the slave master's baby from crying overnight. Sojourner writes of her father dying alone, of starvation, granted freedom only because he was no longer of use to the slave master, but he was too old and too weak to care for himself. Sojourner tells of marrying a fellow slave named Thomas, not for love, but for the purposes of breeding. These were just a few of the gifts of slavery described in their writing. Holtz also uses the fact that Anglos gave Africans the gift of Christianity. He argues that this keeps them from being savages. While I myself am a Christian, I realize that during these times, Christianity was used as a tool of subjugation. All of the slaves are taught that slavery is their lot in life, given to them by God. When thinking of running or defying their masters, the elder slaves in their life often used the scripture as a way to talk them out of not pursuing freedom. And when they were beaten or abused, they accepted it as God's will. Holtz's arguments about the black race are the exact reasons why so many felt justified in their treatment of the people of color. Slave owners felt superior and saw blacks as subhumans. They believed they were justified in their treatment. Today, while there is no longer slavery, racism is still alive and well. And sadly and surprisingly, these arguments are still being used today to justify this. The review of the distinction of the races is being used as a tool in white supremacy against not only blacks, but also all people of color. Thank you.